Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, 1847, the USS Jamestown arrives in Ireland. The Jamestown was an American sailing ship, a sloop of war, a key part of the U.S. Navy, but in this moment it was sailing to Ireland as an aid ship. It was full of food and supplies to help the people of Ireland who were suffering greatly during the potato famine of the era. One person wrote about it at the time in this way. They said, quote, "A ship of war changed into an angel of mercy, departing on no errand of death, but with the bread of life to an unfortunate and perishing people." Many years later, the Boston Globe would put this mission into bigger context, saying, "Never before had the people of one nation offered assistance to those of another on such a grand scale, a gesture that would serve as a model for America's future humanitarian efforts." So let's talk about the Jamestown's voyage to Ireland, how the effort helped Ireland and also united many factions over there and over here in the United States in this humanitarian effort. So here, as always, are Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hi, Jody.
Hey there.
What's on this ship? Food?
Food.
What do we know?
Lots and lots of food for lots and lots of hungry people.
Lots of food. Aid, everything you can possibly imagine. That bread, everything you would need to restore, to nourish you, to bring aid to people who are on the brink. I can only imagine what that ship must have been like for those who got to witness its arrival.
And, just for context, I mean, it's a lot of food can fit on this ship. I mean, we're talking about a war vessel. I don't know. I'm a Master and Commander fan, so I just imagine that. But that's it. That's basically the gist, right? The 1840s and 50s, these kinds of big sailing ships, but they're loaded up. The Jamestown itself, maybe we can mention this at the end, but, would go on to have a really interesting history, fighting mostly in wars. But here it is, loaded up with food, heading from the United States to Ireland, which, as I mentioned in that Boston Globe article, kind of is one of the first times that the United States takes this sort of humanitarian leadership role. I think that's a huge part of this story.
Mm-hmm. It is, and it's a point in U.S. history where the U.S. hasn't really emerged as a world power. So it is not necessarily expected to be playing this kind of humanitarian role on the world stage. And to be doing it here took, I think, some pretty specific conditions, which is to say there were already so many Irish immigrants in the United States who were personally connected to and continuously informed on how bad things were getting in Ireland and how desperate people living in Ireland had gotten, that they were able to kind of rally not just Irish Americans, but other folks in Boston and around the country as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that appears to be one of the big sort of elements of this story, is that it is not just Irish Americans or even like recent immigrants from Ireland who are, sending remittances back home or whatever in the way that immigrants always do. But it's it feels like a real moment of civic unity.
Yeah.
And there's reports that, I think people understand the significance of this, but there's reports that like Catholics and Protestants are getting together to do food drives and raise money and so forth. And so like that's notable.
Not just like Catholics and Protestants, but like Native Americans, like the Choctaw, are sending food. Enslaved people in Alabama. Like there is this moment of like national solidarity toward helping out the Irish that I don't think we've ever seen in this moment in our history. I mean, now in a current sort of contemporary moment, we see the United States providing aid all the time. But this is a moment in which, for a short period, for a season, people sort of set aside their politics or their personal feelings and realize that, the crisis was dire. I mean, when you think about the fact that during this famine, about 1 million people are estimated to have lost their lives. Another 1 million people leave Ireland altogether. Many of them come to the United States. But this is a period in which so many people were dying that they could not even properly bury their dead. They were too weak to dig graves, too weak to tend to people. Because the starvation was that acute.
Yeah, I think that level of desperation helps explain a lot of this, combined with there were so many immigrant communities in the United States that people understood the idea that there would be people back home who were suffering, who needed help, and that they would do what they could to help them.
Kellie, you mentioned that the Native American Choctaw people chipped into this, and we love an interesting monument on this show, and there's actually a monument in Middleton County, Cork, Ireland, called Kindred Spirits, which is this large stainless steel outdoor sculpture consisting of 9 20-foot eagle feathers arranged in a circle. It's really beautiful, and it is created to commemorate the 1847 donation from the Choctaw to the Irish famine relief. It was put up in 2017, and I just really love that you would be walking around in County Cork, Ireland, and run into a monument to Native American generosity.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting The World Together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
This is peak Irish famine, and 47 is known as Black 47. I mean, the year when, the deaths really peaked. And then in the wake of that, we get this massive migration and really reshaping of the United States because of Irish immigrants. But, here there's still that moment of like, we can help people who are still there, right? I think that wave has not started to really come in this specific moment. It's more we can send help over there, and then it certainly started to flow in the other direction. But there's some, like over 45 and 46, there had been some humanitarian efforts. Quakers were involved doing relief operations, and then in 47 is this moment. And, the U.S. is starting to get involved with the Mexican-American War in this moment. For the Admiral of the Navy to say, yes, we can spare a ship for this effort is no small thing, and it gets approved in a joint resolution by Congress to send this ship. So it really is kind of like top to bottom a kind of remarkable rallying of resources and effort.
The timing also feels important because it is before that kind of most significant wave of Irish immigrants that's going to spur a lot of anti-Irish sentiment. So it's kind of that sweet spot moment before the anti-Irish sentiment gets particularly heightened.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, in Boston, no surprise, the New England Relief Committee is a big part of this. Catholics and Protestants are cooperating in an effort to collect money and food. They organize this voyage once they've secured the ship. About $150,000 worth of food and cash, which is about half of the $300,000 that gets collected in total to get sent over there. They start loading the vessel on St. Patrick's Day. I don't know if that's intentional or it just happens to be when it all comes together.
It's probably intentional.
Probably intentional. But then here, here we are a few weeks later. The ship actually takes off and then arrives in April in Cork, and then it makes a number of stops in Ireland to a bunch of different towns and distributes the money. And then over the course of the year, there's another sort of it's I think in grand total about 115 ships delivering food, clothing, provisions, and so forth. Apparently, U.S. citizens shipped so much grain to Ireland that corn prices dropped on the British market, which offered even a little more relief for people struggling in Ireland to be able to buy crops slightly cheaper. So, there's big impact here.
We should say that part of the context is that it's not just that there is a famine, but that this famine is impacting the potato, and the potato is the major exporter of Ireland. So people cannot make money in the way that they would to provide for their families. And there's a whole, spiral effect that happens with this famine as well.
Right. And I mean, you're hinting at also, I mean, we're not an Irish podcast, but like all the geopolitical dimensions of the famine and the British rule and the way that the economy was controlled by the British, and obviously the famine has a massive impact on the sort of geopolitics of Ireland and its relationship with colonial rule as well. But that's all tied in here for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the thing that made it particularly tragic is that people in Ireland were growing grains, and they were they had animals, and they were creating meat and butter, but they had to sell all of that in order to pay their taxes and things. So they had all this food surrounding them that they couldn't eat, and the only thing they could eat was the potato, and the potato went away, and that compounding poverty plus starvation is just that's the spiral.
Right.
And then on top of that, really bad winters, really brutal winters.
So, this is 47. I mean, it really is like 45 to 55. So this is at the beginning of that massive wave when, you look at some of the numbers, a third of the population of Ireland left their homeland in that stretch. A lot of them came to the United States. There's the story of the thousands who were quarantined on Deer Island in Boston Harbor before they could be allowed on, and many of them died there. And, I don't think we've done a story on that particular immigration wave and the way it reshaped this country, but this is tied up into that as well. As we wrap up, I just want to return to kind of some of the historical work on this. Really has identified that like the hostility within the U.S. Irish and Yankee communities is, in this moment, I mean, the memory of the Revolutionary War is, still there, and so I think it's not nothing that sort of hostilities were put aside, different communities banded together for this cause. I mean, it tells you sort of how pressing the need was. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. We've gotten a couple emails from folks. Joseph sent us an email about this one, so thank you for that. And I'm sure we'll return to this time period and the wave of Irish immigrants for sure. But we will leave it there with the USS Jamestown. Oh, sorry. I wanted to say the Jamestown ended up fighting in a bunch of wars, traveling all over the world. I don't know. It's interesting. Go read about Jamestown. The ship itself gets into some stuff. I would say this is probably its most laudable moment.
A high point for sure.
Yeah. And it's like very early in its career, and then it gets used for much sketchier purposes. When we talk about American influence, it gets used for much more nefarious purposes going forward. But here, a real moment of American leadership and influence.
I know. Maybe they should have retired it after this.
I know.
Gotta go out when you're on top.
Yeah,
you've done your good for the world. We'll put you out. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the episode. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.